In the previous two videos, we built the hanging platform, which the loading block sits on, and the two sides that are just all by themselves. So now the next step is to start assembling all this stuff together. So all the cross bracing. So if we look at an earlier completed bridge, we're going to try and do most of this cross bracing in this video, and you'll see how I approach that. So before we start gluing or even attaching anything to the jig, one of the most important and a little bit tedious aspects of this build is to keep organized and to pre-cut as much as possible and to record everything for your log and to be able to reproduce it. So in the prior build, that's what all this area is up here. I will try and draw it a little bit bigger for this build so we can see it better. So I like to draw what we're going to be doing. Those are our sides. I use, if it's a solid line, it's going to be in front, and if it's a dotted line, it's going to be on the back side. So this design alternates the cross members being in front and behind at 5 centimeter intervals. And there's none on the top. Actually, on the top, there's going to be 3 support pieces. And I like to record what material we're using for this. So these support pieces is this tiny little piece here. I've been using 3/16 by 1/32 bass, and it's just 1 centimeter, and there's 3 of them. That's this tiny piece here, and we'll record its mass, total mass, 0.048. I like to color code things. Usually actual mass will be in red, so it's easy to see. And then we have a bunch of cross members, and then we have the horizontal cross members, and then we have the X's basically in addition. And there are 5 sets of these. So because I have already built this design before, I know what the lengths of all these things need to be. So I like to record that as well. Right? So we'll start with the horizontal cross members. This is 3.4. This is all going to be in centimeters, and there's 2 of them. The one in back is 5.5, also 2. Then 7.2, 9.2, and this one is 10.8, and this bottom one is 11.3. Now these bottom 2 in the current iteration that I'm building, and I'm just going to leave it the same for this build, but this would be a place for optimization opportunity, is 1/16 by 1/32 bass. Basically very similar to what the primary tension members are. These members are also in tension. And then all the rest of the material, the cross members and the X's, are 1/20 by 1/16 balsa. And this is relatively light balsa. And then for the cross members, I know the length. These are 5.2, and there's 4 of them, because there's 2 on each side, 2 on this side, and 2 on the other side. Left and right, not top and bottom. This is 6.5, and this is 8, and this is 9.5, and 11. Now these aren't exact. They're probably all a little bit long, but we'll be able to trim that up in the final final polish stages. So I like to at least record. It's not really necessary to record actual mass of every single piece. There's a whole lot of pieces here. I think 32 or something, plus these top pieces. So that's a lot to keep track of. So, and to just keep organized in your build space. So I'll give you some of my tips for that. Okay, so let's start with, you can see up top here, I did the actual mass of these heavier tension pieces. So let's do that also. And whenever there's a pair of identical things or four of an identical thing, I like to keep them not cut up completely just yet. So I'll keep them in their pairs. All right, so for instance, we'll start with this 10.8, and there's two of them. So we'll measure out, 10.8, and then we'll do a second one of 10.8. And we'll cut this. And for now, we'll keep that separate. Actually, we can weigh that and see what its mass is. This is 0.145. So we'll keep that separate. Yeah, so another thing to do, usually I use even more space than I have here for the video, so I'm trying to keep things compacted. All right, we'll do the bottom one. So 11.3 times 2, that's what, 22.6. So 22.6 and 11.3. Okay, and that actual mass is that's interesting, 0.131. This was actually from a piece that's slightly less dense. That's why this one's a little lighter, but that's okay. Now for all of, okay, so let's do this. Okay, hopefully we can still see this. We'll keep these in order, right? So next we're going to cut all the horizontal cross pieces. And now we're using this balsa. That's 1/20th of an inch thick and 1/16th of an inch wide. And if we do, we'll start with the biggest one. So 9.2, so that'd be 18.4, 9.2. Basically keep the, don't cut it in half yet. And then 7.2, so that would be 14.4. And 5.5, so that'd be 11. Three 3.4. 6.8. Did I do that right? Yes. Okay, so now you can see here are all the horizontal cross pieces. So we want to measure the actual mass of all those balsa pieces. So that is all of these 8 pieces is 0.160. And you can see I'm using much lighter cross bracing than up here to see if we can optimize the mass that way. So we'll also just keep these in their order to be organized. Okay, so now we want to do basically the same thing with all these cross members. And and this time keeping all 4 of them. I don't like how this is turning, so we'll just chop that, discard that. We'll start with the bottom here, which is 11 by 4, so that's 44. So then we want 11, 22, 33. And then again, just keep them all in one piece for now. So this will be all the cross members at the bottom. And then the next one is 9.5. We're going to start with a new piece. Guess that would be what, 1938. Right. And 9.5. 19. And then if you don't like to do math, you can just align it this way. 9.5. And again, keep all 4 of those together. Next is 8. So that's 32. 8, 16, 24. And 6.5 might be running out. Let's see. 15, that would be 26. 13, 19.5. And then 5.2. So we can do that in halves. 10.4. Okay, so there's all of our cross pieces. This is extra. I'll put that aside. Now we can easily measure or weigh all the cross pieces at once. That's all these pieces. And that's 0.487. And then we can do the total is 0.16, 0.487, 0.145, 0.131. So this is 0.923 grams. So that is almost a whole half gram less than the previous build up here. So right off the bat, we know we're going to save almost a half gram there, and with the sides, we're going to save another, 0.2 or so grams, so maybe 0.7 grams. So we might be close to a 7-gram bridge once we're all done here, which would be interesting to see if that works. Okay. Now we shall look at the assembly jig a little bit. Let's do that. Oh, we'll cut this little piece up later. Okay, so we're not ready quite yet to start gluing, but I wanted to talk a little bit about this assembly jig. So originally I was thinking I'd create a jig for the assembly and then have another jig to install the platform, the hanging platform. But as it turns out, it works pretty well to have just a single jig to do both of those things. So that means you can build it all and then assemble the the platform, and then you only need to take it off the jig to do the final cross members and the polish work. So let's see how our sides fit on here. So this was from before. Oh, let me talk a little bit more about this jig. So, standard 3D printed jig that's been glued together. I'll put the STL files in the video description. The center part is printed as one piece, and then there's two edges, and they're glued together. That's a good way to make sure this part is very accurate. That's the most critical part. And then what I found is a very handy thing to do is, so I've got this jig taped to, this is just a giant ceramic tile, which not only gives you an extremely flat surface to work with, it allows you to rotate your entire working environment to be in a position that it's best for you to be working. And this has been really handy. I don't know how well I'll be able to pull that off while I'm recording, but like when you have your bridge on here, you know, if you're right-handed, you can have it be right in front of you here, and then you know you can turn it all the way around and work on the other side. Same with the left and right. So that works really well. So you're never having to lean over and work on something that's not in a comfortable position to work. So I found that's a really handy thing. I should have done that a long time ago. With that will apply to no matter what you're building in terms of an assembly jig. Okay, let's look at the sides and see how they fit on here. In general, these guys will be like that. It should come together pretty much perfectly at the top, right? And you want to have it centered. It really doesn't matter as long as they're both centered together, right? Whether it's perfectly centered on the jig. But you want to have the jig supporting both sides up here. And again, my favorite tool here is the blue painter's tape to help this process. So we can just tape one side on. Let's see if this is in range. Yeah, it's pretty good. And because we'll be gluing things across here, you don't want to tape over this, right? But in general, you can tape this on there. And this is something you want to take your time with to get accurate. And then I like to put another bit of tape here, and that can fold in. And once you've taped this side on, just kind of make sure everything is firmly in place. Like both sides are touching the ground. This is touching. Everything is good. And again, like I mentioned earlier, it's pretty handy to be able to rotate this around to do the other side, so you don't have to lean over it. So now we'll try and align this side. don't worry if you have to take a couple tries at this. It's important to get it right rather than quick the first time. And that, you know, you don't have to apply too much pressure with this tape. You're really just kind of holding it in place a little bit. And again with the tape here. Okay, that's pretty good. And again, double check all the sides are pressed down. Yes. Okay. Now let me align this here so that try to get the best view with the camera. Okay, so the very first thing I like to glue is the top. And we're just, you'll notice it just touches at the very point at the top. So this glue is not really going to do a whole lot to hold it together, but it's going to hold it together while we build it. At the end, we're going to reinforce this top quite a bit. But for now, we'll just sneak some glue in there. And try and get that as straight as possible. I might have missed a little bit, but that's okay for now. And we'll just hold this for a little bit. Okay, so now that top is at least held together enough to work on it. Now, before we start gluing any of the cross members on here, like in my previous builds, I always like to know exactly where things are going. Oh, before I do that, I almost forgot. Because these are at an angle, this is not a flat surface to one another. It doesn't create a flat plane. You can glue the pieces right on here, but they'll have a little bow, which is okay, but you can also just sand this down a little bit to give a more flat surface to work with. So I found that's not a bad thing to do. So we'll do that a little bit. You have to be careful because it's not very sturdy right now in this condition. And it doesn't have to be completely flat, but making it more flat than it was will help things out. Okay, and hopefully I remember to do the other side too. So I like to work on one side at a time, mainly because it's easier to do that way. Okay, so I like to know exactly where I'm going to be gluing things, and I like to mark down on the device where things are going to be to not get confused. So I mentioned before that basically each level is 5 centimeters up. But it's kind of awkward to use a big metal ruler or something like that to measure. So one handy trick is to use a piece of balsa and just mark off your 5 centimeter marks on here. And now this can act like a ruler from either side. And it's much easier to manipulate. So you can see I have little tick marks on here at every 5. And I really want to have it start, you know, we're going to put a cross member basically where we can down here. And then we can put a mark at every spot. Actually, the top doesn't even get it. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so now this side is pretty much prepped, ready to go. So the next thing I like to do is finally have our pieces ready to go, right? So, and now we can do the final cuts on them. Let's see. So this was the longest piece. So now this part is in 2, so this is going to be this piece down here. And you can see it's a little long, which by design, so we can clip it. Now every time we glue or we attach this piece down here, I like to put the other piece of that on the other side, to leave it down there ready to go when the time comes. And we'll do that one by one. So now we will just do this as carefully as possible. And this piece is this. Oh, I already made a tiny mistake. These pieces are the dotted lines that go on the bottom. That's why they were a little too long. So yeah. So that piece will stay not glued on. So what I just cut there was this dotted line here. And we won't get to attach that until the bridge is done and we have to pull it off here. So what we're really doing now is this guy here. It's 10.8, which is this piece. So if we cut this guy, we put the second one down there. Now this piece should fit a little better, and it does. Okay. So now we're doing the 10.8. And it's kind of a preference whether you do one side at a time with the larger pieces. Kind of one at a time works pretty well. Sometimes when you are doing the shorter pieces, gluing both sides at once works pretty well. But I like to start with the horizontal cross members, get those done, and then do the diagonal ones. So this is a tedious process, and you have to be patient. And you can just kind of lift up this piece. You can account for the glue to run down a little bit, and then again I like to use the pin itself to hold it in place, so you're less likely to glue your finger on there and cause problems. Okay, so there we go. So we'll leave that one aside. So now the next piece is another dotted line. So we won't get to glue that one until it's done. So we should actually leave those over there. All right, so that means this piece we don't get to use until we're done. So we'll leave that uncut right there. So the next one up is 7.2. This one we can cut. And now you just have to remember to keep track. So these two will be on the other side. I basically just put these dots here because we will need them for the X's. But now our next piece on top is this one right here. We'll see if we can do both at once. And you want to make sure you're not inducing any bending while you're putting this on. Like these first few, the shape is not, you know, rigid very much. So you can be careful to not, see how this can move a lot. Right. But now we're into balsa. So this is a balsa piece. This is also balsa. So it adheres pretty quick. So the next one again will be on the other side. So that's this double piece. We'll leave that aside. Actually, to be consistent, let's put, I basically shouldn't have cut that one yet to be consistent. All right, and then finally, this top piece here, we can cut this one. This one goes over here, right? So this is the twin of this one, so it can go over here. These two, one can go over here. Now we should have this piece here. And if you just put the drop of glue a little higher than your dot, and if you're quick enough, you know, you time it, because the glue will drip down the surface. So you just have to try and be quick about that, and that just takes a little practice. Okay. So now the horizontal pieces are done on this side, or the front ones are. So now let's move to the X's. Now the X's are all on top, so we can just do those systematically from largest to smallest. Let's make sure we've got these in the correct order. Okay. So again, remember this is this bottom one, and this is all 4 pieces. So what we're going to do is cut this in half. Save these 2 for down here, for when we do that side. And then we can cut this one into all its pieces. And now it's always good to test fit this, so that fits pretty well, right? So now we can put our glue there. Okay, and then when you're working with the longer cross pieces, so remember it's very important to get the center glued also. But instead of having to try and put glue in the center beforehand with this one, or try and measure it and do all that stuff and have the glue drip down, you can leave that till after you glue the ends, because these pieces will bend enough to sneak it in. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. So first we'll glue it in there. And this is where, you know, you might glue your fingers to the device if you're not careful. Even if you are careful, it happens. If you do notice your fingers are getting glued to it, try and roll it off as much as possible instead of just picking your thumb up or your finger up directly, and maybe using another finger to help hold it down. Okay, so now we need to make sure, it's super critical to get the glue in between there. So now you just sneak it in there like that, and that's all there is to it. So now that piece is glued properly. Okay, next one up. Again, we'll cut it in half. We'll save the half for that side. We'll cut this one in. Now what I like to do, it's not super critical, but it doesn't hurt, is to keep track of which one's over and which one's under and alternate them. So if you noticed, I glued this one first down here, and then this one is over. So next, let's glue this one first, and then that one will be over. So if there's any twisting induced by this over and under bending, it will alternate. But if you happen to forget and do one wrong, it's not worth undoing. Let's put it that way. So it's not critical enough to try and redo something if you make a mistake. But in general, that's not a bad plan to try and do this over-under process. Now for this final one, because it's so short, I do like to put the glue in the center first, so you can kind of mark it where it needs to go. Okay, so that's this side is pretty much done. Now we can rotate this around and do the whole thing again. And if you remember, maybe you're wondering why we need to put that glue in the middle there. So what that is doing is effectively quadrupling the buckling strength of these pieces, because the buckling strength is the square of the distance. So when we put this, when we glue there, the piece essentially becomes half as long. So it becomes 4 times as strong in compression. So that's why it's really important to do that. Okay, that's the bulk of the cross members. The final thing I want to do for this part of the video is to do the cross support enhancement here. So we will. That's pretty straightforward. We're just going to cut this into 3 1 centimeter pieces. And the reason this is necessary was the previous bridge before the one that held everything was essentially identical but didn't have this reinforcement. And this top part ripped apart because the wires were pulling down so hard it was basically opening this up. And it was actually not the glue joint that failed, it was the material itself. Yeah, the wood itself failed. So the easy answer was just to create these cross pieces and add them on here. Now you'll notice this is not flat, right? Because this is also at an angle. So the best way to deal with that is, let's see, make sure it's in the picture if I can get it in there. To use our rotary sander again and just try and get this as flat as possible. It's pretty good, and maybe take a sanding block to it. There we go. Now we should have a pretty good surface to glue these onto. Really just, I kind of experimented, or not experimented, but my first attempt was to just use 3 of these in the center of each one and in the middle, and it worked. It might be possible to do less than that. So that would be something to experiment with a bit. But I would use a fair amount of glue here and just have that held down. Do one in the middle. And then finally, this piece. I can't remember whether I put some on the edge to reinforce it, but when in doubt, it can't hurt to make sure that it's fully glued on there. So I think that's it for this video. In the next one, we'll attach the hanging platform and take it off the jig and do the final cross-member attachments and do the final polish to make sure it's all trimmed up and ready to go.